one of them speaks up and says, yo, are you a dad? And I'm going, no, why? And he goes, what? What are you doing teaching us how to be a father? I was like, no, I'm not a dad, but I have a dad that was a great example.
Oh, good.
And I'm here from that perspective to share what it means to have a great father. And the other ones were like, "Oh, that's amazing!" They all,
touche.
Touche. I was in the South Bronx. There were gangs everywhere: Bloods, Crips, the Nietas, and the Kings. And I had to deal with juggling which block I would step on and what street do I go. And there are things that to this day my mother does not know.
Oh, yeah, I can. Listen, you're not the only one in that game. Welcome to Bare Wires, where we have unfiltered conversation for curious people. My name is Brian Heyman. I'll be your host. Today we have a special guest from Rockland County, Carlos Martinez, who's put together an organization that serves the people throughout the county with disabilities and people that are on the border of poverty. He's turned a nonprofit into a juggernaut in Rockland County that people rely on every day. No one ever sees what he does, but thousands of people rely on the services provided by Bridges. So I'd like to welcome tonight Carlos Martinez. Welcome, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate being here.
I have a bunch of stuff I want to talk to you about, as you probably know, and just for full disclosure, I've known Carlos for years. I actually sit on one of his boards, an advisory board, and so I know a lot about Bridges, but we'll get into non-profits in general, and we'll be specific about the non-for-profit that you run. But let's start in the beginning. I know you're not from the area. Where were you born in?
So, crazy story. I was born in Puerto Rico in a little area called Rio Piedras. Literal translation is Rocky River. It's right on the outskirts of San Juan.
Okay.
And when I was 1 year old, my mom decided, now she's 15 years older than me, so she was 15 at the time, to run away from home.
She was 15 when she had you?
15,
wow, okay.
Yes. So she ran away from home with a guy she loved at that time and followed him all the way, of all places, to the Bronx in New York City, New York. And that's where I grew up.
Wow, so you grew up in the Bronx, South Bronx?
Yeah, South Bronx.
Wow. So that must have been the experience. You went to local schools? Or?
Yes, yep. Walking every day because, my mom didn't have a car, so we walked to school. I didn't know a lick of English, so I was learning English as I go. It was a process, and the earlier years I say were easier in the sense because you're young, you're naive, you're learning. I think when I started going to middle school, just before that, that's when things...
And those were all public schools when you went to middle school?
All public schools,
And
yeah.
the South Bronx is known as a pretty rough area, especially when you were there, actually.
Oh, yeah.
So you got a survival instinct when you were down there, and you got to see firsthand, people in poverty, Because my father, yeah. I just have to know that because my father actually owned a business down in the South Bronx at the same time you were there. So,
oh, no way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still have very vague memories of moments that were harsh on a child. For example, there's a street 2 blocks down that were known for people that were exploiting, certain situations, women that were sort of selling themselves. And those are times when I'm walking innocently through these blocks and I'm seeing this activity going, what is this? Yeah. And at those times, my parents said, go outside, go play, and then come back at a certain time. So we explored all these blocks and all these different areas. And I have one vague memory, just to give you a context of the block I lived in. It's called Fail Street. And, I looked out the window, and all of a sudden there was money coming from, the sky. At least I thought. And as I get closer to the window to go check what's going on, my mom grabs me by the neck and pulls me back away from the window, and all of a sudden I hear sirens and helicopters. I learned much later that it was a drug bust. And there were people on the roof that just threw
the evidence off the roof.
They threw the evidence off the roof.
They could always make more of that.
Oh, man, I heard gunshots. It was wild. And these are things that still stick with me all this time. I remember that this is where I lived.
So how old were you when you actually, did you go to high school down there?
Yes, I went to Morris High School.
All right, so do you have brothers and sisters?
I'm the oldest of 6.
You're kidding me.
No.
Wow, there's something we have in common. I'm not the oldest, but 6.
Yeah.
And that gets kind of hectic. And I could see you being out on your streets, just doing your thing, because it's almost impossible to watch 6 kids. So
yes.
what it ends up giving you is a lot of independence, whether you want it or not.
Absolutely.
So you were on your own. We needed to be back for dinner time. That was like the drop dead time that we had to be back. But most of the time we were on our own, and I'm sure you were the same place.
And I kid you not, there are things that to this day my mother does not know.
Oh yeah, listen. You're not the only one in that game. My mother's passed away, and she went to her grave not knowing, and probably better off.
And some life or death situations. Like I was in the South Bronx. There were gangs everywhere: Bloods, Crips, the Nietas, and the Kings, and I had to deal with juggling which block I would step on and what street do I go, and making sure I'm not wearing blue or red on a certain day because I heard that you can get jumped if you do. So there was a lot of those things you had to navigate while also being with my younger siblings, because I'm out there with them as well.
Right.
While the youngest ones are at home with my parents.
Right, and you had to protect your younger brother, your younger sister, almost on a regular basis. It's funny that you say that. We experienced the same thing when we were growing up, even up here, because we were really just one generation from the Bronx. Most of the people came up here either from northern Manhattan or the Bronx, and you don't change that much just because you move. They basically acted the same way here as they would in the Bronx. So I'm familiar with what you're talking about. So now you go through elementary school, you're in high school in the Bronx, right?
Yeah.
When is it that you start to think about what's the next step? Do you come to Rockland soon after that?
It's interesting. So the Morris High School is the school where Colin Powell went.
Okay.
And so I always joke because it was one of the second worst schools in the Bronx, but they had this shrine for Colin Powell, because they wanted to say, hey, he graduated from here, which I thought at the time, I guess I realized it was amazing because I saw, this is a national figure.
Right.
And it's pretty awesome. I actually ended up getting to meet him because he came back to the school.
Oh, wow.
And I was one of the few students that got to stand with him and take a picture. It was pretty awesome. It was during the time that Governor Pataki was
Republican governor in New
York State.
Right.
And I have a picture somewhere, but it's me standing there with them in a picture. And so those were times that kind of changed me in a different way, in a positive way, because had I not had that experience, I probably would have still had that sort of small mind mentality that a lot of us get stuck with in the South Bronx. And Morris High School, I was one of 50 students of a class of 250 to graduate.
You're kidding me.
So it was a very small number, and I couldn't believe it.
Did a lot of those kids end up graduating in jail?
A lot of my friends, either they ended up not going further in their lives because they have children early.
Right.
Some of them have gone to jail. Some of them died because of gang violence. Right. There's a friend of mine, I still don't know to this day where he is. His name was Richard. If you are around, Richard, and you're hearing this. But he was a good friend of mine, and since we graduated high school, I just don't know what happened, with him. And it was one of those situations where a lot of my friends, a lot of people I knew, ended up in different places in their lives that were not a good or positive place,
Right. So you're in high school. You graduate from high school. What happens then?
So it happened to be a friend of mine. So I went to church growing up, and my mom ended up meeting my father and my stepdad, who ended up raising us. So he's my dad, my father. She ended up meeting him. He was a man that went to church, and we all went to church as a family growing up, which is really awesome. Taught us some really good morals and ways to live life, and also in addition, not just being confident, And there was a friend of mine there in the church who played piano, so I learned playing drums with them, and we played together in a band, and I got to love music as a result. And, he was the one that said, I have a brother who's going to Nyack College, and he plays the keys, and they're doing music. And I said, oh, that's cool. I should check that out. So I applied for Nyack College. It was the only college I applied to, actually. And at the same time, I'm looking for jobs, right? As you said, I already started becoming independent. I've been working since I was 12 years old.
What kind of jobs were you working?
From the supermarket, packing bags, to working in an architectural firm in New York City as an administrative assistant to this 90-year-old executive administrative assistant who really taught me a lot of the business world, which was really awesome. They really celebrated me when I was finished and I was ready to go to college. I felt so special at that time because they gave me stuff, materials, and supplies for college, and I never.
Is that what you went to college for, architect?
No, I wanted to. They knew that was my dream.
Right.
But because things happened, my mom, when I got accepted into LaGuardia High School, she said, you're not going there because you have to take the trains every day and it's dangerous and I don't want anything happening to you. It was a big argument. I ended up going to Morris.
Okay.
And so that's where I got my real life, sort of experience on the dangers of life. And the things that I experienced there were some things are pretty evil. And that's where I started getting a feeling of something's got to change. Like, I got to do something,
You think that by going to church built a good foundation for you to think differently than the rest of the kids?
Absolutely. Everybody that I met where their worldview changed, where the worldview was for the positive, like, we all have one thing in common in the South Bronx, is that we were grounded on faith. And that, to me, is a special part of growing up in the South Bronx. Because if you didn't have that, then you're either in a gang or you're doing drugs.
Right.
Or you're in you're in a situation that only
So that was like an oasis for you. That really actually captured your attention and it prevented you from going to the natural places that you would by just hanging out with certain people.
Yes.
So it served its purpose for you, and
Definitely.
you wish that more kids would be interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could talk about all the other stuff like the resources that these schools needed, but if there's something like faith that can help keep a person strong, that could keep a person confident, making good decisions, making the right decisions, that has so much weight and value.
Amen.
Than anything else.
So you figured, so somehow you get to Nyack College.
I'll tell you this, I was applying for a job and got a call from a mortgage company that they were going to give me a chance. Now, this was back then in high school. They said they offered me a $25,000 salary. I got excited. This high schooler that had finished school, getting ready to make money, and I'm thinking, all right, this is great. I get a call the next day from Nyack College that says, oh, we accepted your application. Congratulations. And I go, okay, what do I do here?
Wow.
So I thought it through, talked a little bit with the counselor that called me, and I made the decision to decline the job and go to college. And when I went to the college, that's where everything sort of shifted for me when it came to issues like that I experienced.
Is that your first time in Rockland when you came to college?
That was my very first time out of New York City.
That's crazy.
And believe it or not, when the recruiter from the college, because they came, picked me up from the Bronx, brought me up to Nyack College, I kid you not, I saw a turkey and I went wild. I couldn't believe it. I saw a live grown turkey. And
you walk around here, there's dozens of them all around
everywhere.
here.
Even a deer. And the guy was like, are you all right? I was like, I'd never seen one before.
Wow.
I've never experienced this. And I was committed. I was set for life. I said, I'm going to come here. I'm going to experience something outside of New York City for the first time. And that was when I started learning about the different topics, social work, psychiatry, And I went there for music, and I didn't even look at music.
So you were working for an architect company, so you didn't want to go into that at all? You never felt, well, maybe this is my direction?
My mom, for safety reasons of her own, decided I would go to Morris.
Right. That changed everything.
It changed the path I was going to take, and I still love architecture. In fact, I love drawing.
Okay.
I think we were talking earlier about a mural, and there's a mural that I painted during my high school years in the Bronx.
You're kidding me.
You can see it from the highway on a Chase Bank building. It's a huge...
Still there?
It's still there.
Wow.
And it was this Puerto Rican kid with a Japanese guy and a German woman. The three of us painted that huge mural.
I'd love to see that one day.
Oh, yeah.
I probably have seen it, to tell you the truth, but just didn't know you painted it.
It's there, and it's a great picture. As a guy on a bike, that's the central person you see in the mural, and then there's like imagery of community. You see police officer, a guy selling icy, or what we call piraguas, in the Bronx, and there's a host of community. And the whole point is to make the community drug-free and to try to get that out of our neighborhoods so that people can live with dignity and more freedom, and there's more peace. You know?
Wow! Well, someday you got to send some pictures. I'd love to see it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So you're in Nyack College, which doesn't exist anymore, as we're doing this podcast, but it was the new environment, you get to adapt to that.
For the first few weeks, I got to admit. Because my mom, very smart woman, she sent me a letter that I would get the first couple of weeks, and she said, "I'm proud of you, I miss you, and I know you're gonna, succeed." Man, that broke me down. I was like, "What?" To see that come from my mom in writing was big, was huge, and I was, for the first time, we're a household of 8. In a 3 small bedroom apartment in the South Bronx.
Yeah.
So moving out was huge for me.
Yeah, I know. All that freedom all of a sudden. Oh my God, is this really what the world's about?
And then to go to the country.
Right.
I'm walking up and down campus. I see a field here, deer there. I'm walking up to the big building the college has with all the classes.
You think you arrived.
And I've arrived. I feel like I'm in a new world with a new status, and then it gets to a point where reality hits, and I'm like, I got to get work done.
Right. I got to go to class.
I got to go to class. I got to do this. And I even started working my first year. I got a part-time job while I was doing classes.
Right.
So that's one of the things I treasure and I love most from my parents. And they taught me a strong work ethic, and they taught me to be responsible, and they taught me to be humble. And that's why it was easy to get back in the reality of things, and also, hey, by the way, while you're at it, get a job.
So when did you start thinking about actually working in the social service field? The field's so big, so it's difficult to narrow down. But when do you start saying to yourself, listen, I can do some good work, I can help a lot of people, I can do what I want to do and feel good about it in this particular field, wherever you were at that particular point.
Yeah.
And we'll get into where you've gone since then. But when did that start happening?
Very short conversation with the advisor at Nyack College. I sat there and I said, look, I want to help people somehow, and I would love to be able to go back to the city and do that. What are the different paths I could take? I said I wanted to do psychology. And she kind of summed it up in this way. She said, well, one of the professions you can sit largely and a lot of the time behind a desk, and another one is more versatile. You can do anything and go anywhere with it and help a lot of people at the same time.
So one is an administrative type situation?
Well, more behind the desk.
Oh, okay, all right, I see.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was interested in that, but then she said the other one's more versatile, like a social worker,
right,
where you can go anywhere with that. And
there's a lot of variety to that, and different problems, different situations, not necessarily a controlled atmosphere. And
what I learned later is that it's not just clinical, one-to-one type of profession. It can be macro. It can be related to business. It can be related to communities and advocacy. And
very fluent.
Yes.
Okay,
Exactly.
and you really need to adapt. In a controlled situation like a psychologist comes in, you have your routine. They're going to tell you the deal. You're going to try to help them.
Yeah.
But where you are now is, these things are coming at you fast and furious,
Yes.
and you have to make decisions,
Definitely.
instantaneously. So
Definitely.
it's a different way of helping people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
One's more control. The other one is, more chaotic, to say the least.
That's right. Yep.
So,
That's right.
did you do anything before you went to Bridges to work? Is Bridges your first social service job, or were you at other places?
Yeah, 2 jobs. Again, still going to school and working. But as I was getting my social work degree, I worked in Nyack with an organization called ACT, Adults Caring for Teens.
Okay.
Where I was there mentoring young people who were under PINs or persons in need of supervision, or they were on parole or other justice involved.
Yeah, these were
situations.
programs that the towns and police put together that basically reached out to kids that were in trouble or kids that were not doing what they were supposed to do, and they were trying to straighten them out. PINS is one of the programs.
Exactly.
I just want to explain that. It was an early program to really try to get to the youth at risk.
Exactly, and giving them good example and helping them with decision making. So that was one of the positions I had. Then after that, when I graduated, and just before I graduated, I was working at an organization called Occupations Inc. It's actually known as Access Supports for Living now, based in Orange County, and I was doing fatherhood groups there. So in the county jail,
fatherhood groups.
Yeah,
describe
I have
that.
actually a good story about this one. So I'm preparing with curriculum. They give me this curriculum. It's called Healthy Families of New York is the curriculum, and they send me to a jail, the Orange County jail, to meet with the men, the fathers that are incarcerated.
And you weren't a father at the time.
No. This is the story that's going. So I sit down with these guys, and I start with my process that I learned the curriculum.
Right.
And these guys are sitting around, and you could tell their faces like, this is a joke. And one of them speaks up and says, yo, are you a dad? And I'm going, no, why? And he goes, what? What are you doing teaching us how to be a father? And that was, and I kid you not, I think God helped me in that moment.
Yeah, what's the answer to that?
Because I was like, no, I'm not a dad, but I have a dad that was a great example.
Oh, good.
And I'm here from that perspective to share what it means to have a great father. And the other ones were like, "Oh, that's amazing!" They all,
touche.
And the guy calmed down, and finally, from that point, it kind of broke open. Like I felt more comfortable, and I was able.
It's a great
to talk
answer,
to them.
by the way.
Oh man, I didn't know how it came to me, but I was so happy that it did. And
that's called divine intervention.
That's divine intervention. And I just sat there, and we just went through exercises. We had some dads that were bawling, talking about how they missed their daughter and how they missed their son, and they want to be there for them. It was one of the most memorable jobs I ever had.
Boy, that'll give you a lot of groundwork there, especially in the jail.
Absolutely.
You get to see firsthand, the real basics of some human misery when you're there and you can't be with your children.
Absolutely. And so, so after that position, I ended up getting a job, of all places, foster care.
Oh, wow.
That was my
Where
first.
Where was that?
In the South Bronx.
Oh, you're back now. Now you're back in the South Bronx. Kid,
Yeah.
You thought you were out of there, and they pulled you back.
My mom welcomed me with open arms. She's like, "You could go back to your room," and I said, "Okay, perfect. I have my job. It's walking distance. It's great. I'm a social worker. I'm already been given. I think it was like 21 clients. Clients in the roster, foster care, and there's all these foster care kids." And I got to meet with all the foster parents. And let me tell you, I spent 3 years there. And I had one of my coworkers said, "Carlos, you lasted more than any of us thought you would ever."
Must be an
last."
eye opener to see,
man.
you know, when you'd grow up in a tight family with 6 kids, and you know, you don't have much because I'm familiar with that.
Yeah.
But you had each other, you know what I mean, and you
Exactly.
had people protecting you.
And
but
the love, absolutely.
Yeah, and when
yeah.
when you see these situations that are just
Yes.
chaotic or in chaos, and these kids
Yeah.
don't even know where their next meal's coming from,
Oh,
it
man.
gets to be heartbreaking, you
Yeah.
know. So.
I mean, we were dealing with fresh situations, children taken from the custody of the parent because of
Wow.
abuse and neglect and other. I mean, I could talk to you about very severe circumstances, but I won't go into details with that. But you know, so the kids are in shock, and they are now with a foster parent, and me, as a social worker, I have to go in there and start to help them feel more comfortable. This is temporary. We're going to work to bring you back with your mom and your dad, and then talk to the foster parent, give them tools, help them understand the needs of the child. Doesn't always go the way you plan.
Right. So
Doesn't.
when they must interview these foster parents and stuff like that. I know they receive some kind of stipend for bringing these kids in. And there's a whole
Yep.
cottage industry of people taking kids in. You know, I've been you know, through that where I've watched that happen just for the
Yes.
money's sake. And
Oh,
really
yes.
the situation gets no better for the kid because
Yeah.
it's really just a situation where this
Yeah.
is a moneymaker for them.
Absolutely.
So in that sense, that's what people see a lot of times. But if you put that aside, there are some very good people out there
Yes.
that want to do the right thing,
Yes.
and they bring kids in, and that's the difference in that kid's life.
Yes.
When they come into that, and that's really
Yeah.
what the goal of that is there.
Yeah, and I would never forget them. To this day, I was a part of 3 adoptions with foster parents who were a godsend. They were there for the right reasons.
Wow.
They took the children in, even if they thought it was temporary. They took them in like they were their own, and there was no division between them and their kids. They were a family, and that was a special moment. You know, you go to court and the judge grants them, you know, full parent and and custody, and all you could do is really tear up and feel emotional because these guys did the right thing.
You know the kid's safe.
And
you
I
know?
didn't know the kids saying. To this day, I remember them. I know their names. I mean, their images in my head, in my mind, because those were beautiful moments I experienced in that job, and I'll never forget it. You know?
You think that's where you said to yourself, "This is the field I want to stay in"?
No,
Okay.
it was actually the opposite because I got burnt out.
Okay.
Because that was just 1%.
What is the emotional elevator going up and down all the time? That was too much?
My majority of the cases, I mean, I dealt with a young woman who had type 2 diabetes, constantly in the hospital because her A1C levels were off the roof, and she wouldn't listen to anybody. She's a 13-year-old young lady, and she just doesn't listen to anybody. She self-sabotaged, and she was in the hospital constantly. I had a situation where a foster parent is abusive of the kids, and we had to switch their home. And another one that hides the abuse in a financial way and loves collecting that money, but the child doesn't have a new shirt.
Right. Got it.
You know, and there was it was just so much of that. And the problem was the system. That was my issue. Is the system wasn't helping these kids quickly enough. And there was moments where I was saying, you know, there was a moment where parents were working hard to get custody of the children back, and it wasn't happening. The court kept delaying it, or kept saying, no, you need to take this class and this other class. But they were doing everything they needed, and you could tell these parents were desperate
To get their children
to
back.
get their kids back.
The-
Every meeting, they were there sobbing and hugging and kissing. And I'm going, this is not abuse. They should be back together again. If anything, we can be monitoring the
We'll get
situation.
into all these different types of systems down the line because, you know, in my view, a lot of them are broken. You know, the good intentions are there, but, you know,
Absolutely.
people either take advantage of them or, you know, it's a rotating mill type situation. So you've had this unique experience in that. and it turned you off from social work. What did you think you wanted to do then?
Anything.
Good answer.
I started to look for jobs.
Okay.
And my supervisor knew I was leaving. She was trying everything to keep me because I was the only male social worker, literally the only one out of a floor of 20 social workers. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I kept looking. So I ended up finding a position. So first I would say I transferred from the Bronx to the same company had an office here in Spring Valley.
Oh, wow.
In Rockland County.
Which you're familiar with, Rockland County.
So St. Agatha's New York Foundling was part of that huge. So I had the fortunate opportunity to transfer, but that was just for a 6-month period. And I found a posting for an organization called Rockland Independent Living Center. And in the posting, it was for like a program associate or something, a program specialist. And on the bottom, it said, if you want to be part of an organization that changes systems, then this is the place for you.
So that's when you ended up at Rockland Independent Living. Who was George Holman the executive director at the time?
And the interim executive director was a woman named Eddie Shapiro.
Okay, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think anybody knows. But she was there. She was there for a little while, you could tell, but as an interim. She's the one that interviewed me for the role. And then there was a guy working with her. His name was Joel Taveras, a guy who had his own disability, blind, and also interviewed me. It was a great interview, and I left. I didn't think anything of it. I thought maybe there's a good possibility, and they called me the same day and said, "You got the job."
Wow.
Yeah.
You didn't even get home, and
I didn't even get home. I was like, "Oh, this is perfect." So
where'd you start off there? What was your position there?
I was a program specialist, and what was known as the home care department at the time was called the Consumer Directed Personal Assistance Program. So just started on tasks related to home care, the compliance of it, making sure that people were working in the home when they say they were. But what was cool about the organization was while I started doing sort of those medial tasks, the bigger picture was that we're now taking trips to Albany and advocating, meeting with our representatives, talking to them about programs that affect people with disabilities, legislation that needs to be put in place to help increase access to people with disabilities, and protecting programs like CDPA, this home care program that allowed people with disabilities to hire their own aides. And so that was the highlight. That's what sort of started me on this path of, oh yeah, I want to grow here,
Okay, so you're there. I guess George comes in not how far after?
The next year, 2011, yeah.
I happen to be good friends with George, as you know. So I was actually at Independent Living a bunch of times, and and that's where I first met you when you were working there. So George decides to run for office. I think this is the way it happens. And they put out a search for a new executive director.
Yeah.
You applied for it, right? And so it came down to you. And I want to be honest here. I was, I knew pretty much everybody in that building. And I said, I don't know, man. How old were you at the time? How old were you?
Oh, you want to know my age there? Okay. Let's see. So the first time around.
The reason I'm asking is because I have a reason for it.
Yeah. So I didn't get chosen yet.
Okay.
That first time. The second time, that's a different story. But the first time I was, 14, 15. That was 15 to 16. I was 31, 32?
Yeah, you could have been much more than that because we had a conversation. Howard, George, myself, there was a couple other people there. And they asked me, and they said, look, what do you think? I said, I really like Carlos, but he may be too young for the job.
Yeah.
And actually, I had this conversation, and Walter came right over and goes, no, I think he's ready. I said, really? I said, we'll see. I said, because, that was when we were making the decision. I was talking to these guys about you actually becoming, I said, I hope. I said, because you were young and it was a big job.
Yeah.
And I had my concerns. Since then, I have no concerns. I'm very, very proud of what you've done. And I can't tell you how much I'm a fan of yours. So prove me wrong, and I'm glad you did. So now you're with Independent Living.
Yeah.
And you're the executive director. What was different when you were the executive director that you didn't think was going to happen?
Oh my gosh. I think the hardest part, I think anybody would say the same thing. The hardest part about becoming the executive director in an organization you worked with your peers is that you're now holding your peers accountable. And for the most part,
you're the boss.
Some of them, you're the boss. For some of it was easy because they understood. And for others, it's a little harder. Things were challenging. And
did some of them feel like they should have gotten the position instead of you?
Not necessarily that, but that because I'm there, I think there was this idea that I would be lenient.
Oh, okay.
And I was lenient to the extent that it was reasonable.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we're running a business, an organization.
I thought you were going to say the most difficult thing was working with Howard Hellman, since you got me. Shout out to Howard. No, I'm only fooling with you there. But I came on the board probably. I might have been on the board a little before you became executive, but I was definitely on when you were executive director for a while. And the organization changed, and it started changing from the first day you stepped in there. You had your own ideas, you had your own views on where this was going to go. And I've been on a lot of not-for-profit boards. And these are not easy organizations to lasso, to get control under. There's a different attitude when you're working with not-for-profit people working in the not-for-profit. Not bad, just different. So that was one of the things I had concerns with. You know, I mean, it's really when you're. It's one thing to work for them; it's another to be the boss.
Absolutely.
You know, so you have to separate yourself and stuff like that. That's what I was worried about. And like I said, you did very well.
And to your point, thank you, Brian. But to your point, it's a reasonable concern. You know, it's an organization established. I mean, George Holman was overseeing this organization. It was growing, very well on the home care side. And you're managing around 40-something people.
Right.
So I would say that the concerns were legitimate, and I think it just took a chance for me to prove to the board at the time of the interviews that I know the system well enough, I know the staff well enough, and if you give me this chance, I'll prove that I can make this work, and I'm not. To this day, I'm still learning how to be a good leader, how to be a good supervisor, how to be a good boss. I think we all are, and if we think we're experts, we're wrong. But at the end of the day, there's growth that happens when you have to make one good decision at a time to get to a place where now you're succeeding, And sometimes you make 1, 2, 3, 4 good decisions, then you're going to make a bad one. Now you grow from that, and now you make another good decision.
Absolutely, that's life in general. I want to talk to you about understanding people in the audience, understanding disabilities in its entirety. People think of disabilities with somebody in a wheelchair, somebody on a walker, somebody physical. They always rely because. When you see handicap bathrooms or ramps, it's always focused that way. But try to explain the variety of disabilities, and we'll talk about, how many actual disabilities are out there from one thing to another. If you were to give a spectrum of them, just give me some explanation on that so people understand the magnitude of what we're talking about.
Definitely. I mean, it's the one thing, well, one of many things, that does not discriminate. This disability is one of the most diverse areas of life. And I love how one of our leaders in the movement said it, that it isn't disability that handicaps one, it's society and the way society views it. And for many years, disability was seen, no matter what it was, that a person was just incapable.
Yeah, I have a saying for that, to tell you the truth. And I'm sure I've said it to you, disability doesn't mean you're disabled.
Exactly.
And I'm a true believer in that. But what I'm trying to get at is because it was very, enlightening to me to see, because I was the same way. I had, my vision of what a disability. My sister has MS. I've seen it since she was 20. This was my view of it, up close and personal. But there's a lot of things that fall under this
Yes.
and
I'll give you
of disability.
the categories, right? You got physical disabilities.
Right.
Those things you can see, right? A person with no leg, person uses a wheelchair, person with, a facial, features that are from whether a delay in birth or an accident.
A deformity.
A deformity or a different gait, when they walk. Physical. Then you have cognitive, the Alzheimer's, the parts where the brain is not 100% developed, and you have also developmental intellectual disabilities. Then you have mental health disabilities that are social, emotional, behavioral in nature. And then you have chronic medical conditions like MS and other disabilities that in essence, a disability affects one or more activities of daily living. So if you are legally disabled as an American,
what about drugs or opiates or that type of stuff? Is that considered a disability too?
Not the addiction.
Okay.
The result of the addiction. So if you
explain that to me.
Yeah. So if you are a person that was addicted to drugs, and all of a sudden now it's at a point where now it impairs your ability to work, to drive, that's when it becomes a disability.
Okay, so through drug use, you fall into the category of you're unable
Yes.
to function in society, so that's considered a disability. And I
But
think
you can't be an active user, because that's when you need treatment. You have to be someone that is now in the process of recovery, and now as a result of your drug use, you've experienced this disability.
Yeah, so this is what I'm trying to get into. There is so many gray areas, and people tend to say, okay, there's so many disabilities. You try to figure out really what's real and what isn't.
Yeah.
When we were growing up, this was before you. We were, no one, if you had a disability or if you for whatever reason, it was just, you lived with it, man.
Yeah.
I mean, we beat the shit out of you, or we'd make fun of you. And, that went across the board. I mean, and it didn't matter what it was, it was slow learning. You weren't good in school, or you couldn't play basketball worth the whatever the case may be. But we never looked at it as a disability. We figured that was them, and they had to adapt to the rest of us, or we had to adapt to the rest of them. But now the definition is so widespread.
Yeah.
People have a very difficult time wrapping their head around what's a disability and what's not. And what happens is that people start to tend to say, "What are you kidding me? That's not a. Why are they receiving, help or funds or special treatment for disabilities that we would think you just get along with?" So explain how you relate that information to the general public, because the general public does have that perception. They're fixed. Like most people, I can see the disability, I can hear the disability, whatever those cases may be, but there are a lot of disabilities that people don't even recognize.
Definitely, yeah. And again, it has to be something that can impact two or more activities of daily living. That's what's defined as a disability. And in many cases, there are disabilities.
Give me two examples of that, of daily living that would constitute, on the very outskirts, that would constitute a disability.
Absolutely. So basic things, right? You need to eat, right? You need to be able to drink water or eat, right? So if you can't cook for yourself in a situation, not that you can't provide for yourself, but that you can't cook a meal, eat a meal on your own, right? Because you're disabled. That's the first activity.
I'm going to go one layer.
Yeah.
Okay. Does it mean because you can't cook, or does it mean because why wouldn't you be able to, feed yourself? That's my question. So when you say that, I needed to have defined, because that again, that leaves a gray area, and people don't understand the differences.
Definitely, yeah.
So explain that to me. Just the meal.
The most common area is our seniors, right? When our seniors cannot be involved in cooking because they can cause an accident that can burn something down, right? Those are situations where having someone in the home helps, where they can have someone cook the meal for them and serve them, and they're safe. that's a perfect example of an activity of daily living.
Got it.
So that's
it.
where a senior or older folks.
So we're all hopefully going to get there with any luck.
Yes.
And we'll all be taking services from Bridges because we won't be able to serve. That's a good illustration because people need to understand that there's a wide breadth of services that you provide in the county, and they got to get out of the mode of saying, well, why is this person getting services and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Is overweight a disability?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not. No.
Is blindness a disability? Yes. Okay. Is there a certain amount of eyesight that puts you into that category?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's strict standards
acuity,
that you have to go. Okay.
Exactly.
So these are the kinds of things that people try to understand. What is a disability and what isn't a disability? A lot of them are very obvious. But there are things that. Like if you can't take care of yourself, if you can't hygienically take care of yourself, that's a disability.
Yeah.
All right. So,
and you're speaking to something that's really important, Brian. And there's nothing more that the disability community hates is when people take advantage of the programs and the benefits that exist to support people with disability and their ability to be independent. The most popular area of disability that gets taken advantage of the most, abused is service animals.
Service animals.
And the emotional support animals.
You mean the ones they take on the plane with them, and it's just a pet, and they put a thing around them and say, I need this to be on the plane, sit next to me.
The guy that goes in the bus and says, I have my snake with me.
I always question those dogs. I have to be honest with you. I have two dogs. I had two dogs, and they were the best, but they weren't emotionally, tethered to me.
First off, and I'll give you one story. I was training drivers in a bus company, and the driver gave me a scenario. Hey, this guy was going to come on the bus with his python, and he says, it's like one of those yellow ones, really big yellow snakes. And he goes, you can't get on the bus with that. And he goes, no, it's my service animal. And I looked at him and said, so what did you say? And he goes, I let him on. I was like, what?
Yeah, well, because this is to the point that people really don't understand really where the threshold is anymore, because society has said in so many cases, well, you have a problem. And I can get into a lot of different illustrations of that, but it's kind of difficult for, I'm sure, you to manage, and make decisions on, yes, this is disability, or no, it's not going to qualify for disability.
Well, if there's anyone that could say that on this podcast or on any platform, is I run an organization that is led by more than half people with disabilities on my board and people with disabilities on my staff. And we have been the first ones to see the abuse that people try to, the neglect and the taking advantage of these programs, when we catch them outright and say, listen, you're taking advantage of this. This is not what it's meant for.
Okay, so there's no legal recourse in those situations?
Absolutely not. Okay. Because when you identify that a person is really taking advantage of a system, there's nothing they can do against that, especially with animals. That's the first thing I said. When it comes to service animals, there's only one animal that qualifies as that, and that's a dog, a service dog. There's only one exception. That's a mini horse, a pony. In some states, I don't know why, but in some states, that's the only exception. But it's a dog, and it has to be trained. And legally, there's two questions you can always ask someone, and we see this, our offices are in the mall. I see this all the time, and I've gone up to people, what gives you the right? I work here at Bridges. I serve people with disabilities, and I also train on ADA, and your dog is not a service animal, and that's the only animals allowed in the mall. And why is that? Well, there isn't a place for your dog to refresh himself or to relieve himself. So that is why only service animals are allowed, because they are assisting one in their accessibility, in their journey, in their walk. But it's only a dog. And then there's two questions you ask. Is it a service animal for a disability? It's either yes or no. And what is the animal trained to do for the disability? Okay. That's it. Everybody that has a service animal knows those are two legal questions you can be asked.
So it's an emotional service story.
Not a service animal.
Okay, got it. So I know the next time I'll be flying shortly. I'll know the next time if somebody sits down with me with a dog, go, is that emotionally? Yes, it is. Well, that's not a service.
No.
Let's get going here.
But I will say, though, I will say there is value in the emotional support.
No, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
We know that. But I think a lot of people take it too far.
Yeah. And go one step further than that, with all, and I know that you're dealing with this. It's a tough thing because it affects all not-for-profits, and I'm involved with a lot of not-for-profits. All the fraud that's going on in this country right now, you can go from Minnesota to California. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars. The public only has so much tolerance to that. Mm-hmm. Okay, when they're working every day, and they're saying, okay, I'm okay with paying my tax. I'm okay taking care of people who can't take care of themselves.
Yeah,
I'm all right with all of that. But when I see this fraud in such magnitude, mm-hmm. I recoil, and I'm sure everybody else recoils. What am I sending all this money to the government for? You know what I mean? Because these programs are, by and large, government supported, and you have to deal with that on a certain level. The Minnesota thing, the California, and it happens in New York. It happens in probably every state.
Oh yeah.
But that it's becoming such a problem that the legitimate not-for-profits, especially in this county, have a tough time probably recruiting people or getting people to make donations to them. Yeah. And even, some of the government programs are drying up.
Absolutely.
So how do you face that? How is that affecting your everyday operation at this point?
Oh, big time. It's forcing us to think about the way that the future will be shaped in these areas of funding, and how we're going to pivot from situations where that funding is no longer available. That's the reality. And many people right now we can talk about the federal government, but at the end of the day,
well, those funds, let's just be clear, all right? Most of those funds flow from the federal government through the state.
Through the state.
Okay,
exactly.
So I just want to make that clear for the audience. All right.
Yeah, and we're talking about Medicaid dollars, right? There's a good portion that the federal government matches, and the state provides its own Medicaid funding as well. Right. And in this situation, we're dealing with, and we just dealt with one, right? And this, April of last year, we lost a massive program, a $19 million program.
Yeah, because they try to consolidate the whole system.
There were 600 providers supposedly across the state. I still don't believe that. But 600 providers across the state, they took the entire program, took it away from all those providers and gave it to one big billion-dollar company.
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you, I don't think that would have happened. 10 years ago.
I agree.
Okay, but I think they got away with it because the public's, resistance to what's going on. Lends itself to say, listen, this is more. If we're dealing with one that's more manageable, we can't. And in Rockland County, where we have dozens and dozens, probably more nonprofits than anywhere else in the state.
Too many.
And it's the smallest county in the state. You have to ask yourself, what's going on here? So you're fighting that all the time. You're fighting the public's perception of, are you spending money correctly? Are you doing the things that we want you to do to provide these services? We want the public in general, Americans in general are very generous. And they're always fighting for the underdog. Okay, that's why the laws were passed way back when. But there's a tolerance that at some certain point they're going to say, this is not working. Somebody, and I've been involved with the the rehab system, and and I have my own opinion about that constant revolving of patients and the money involved in that. And I have my own thoughts about, that it's great. I understand they had to put their finger on the dike, 70 to 100,000 people would die in a year. Let's give them, we're going to give them Suboxone, but really there's no escape from that system. And more than not, people end up spending 10, 20, 30 years and sometimes dying and never leaving that system.
Yeah.
So there is some legitimate concern and criticism about the ability to, we're supposed to be, helping them get back into society, producing as normal human beings, and living a life that, may have some pleasure and purpose, okay?
Yeah.
But that's not happening on a lot of these. And I've seen it firsthand. There's, we've been able to, I sit on Rockland Recovery, we've been able to pick a few here, a few there to get back into society.
That's right.
But we see this constant rotation of the same people going through the system.
Codependency.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if it's not designed that way, to be perfectly honest with you.
That's a great point. Wow. It's nonprofits were created to fill a void that government couldn't do, right? In the right way, right? Reasonably, because we don't expect our government to do everything, and we don't want to do that, right? Because it increases taxes and all that stuff. But nonprofits are there to serve a purpose, to serve the gap where government isn't. And I think they're all well intended to do the right thing for the community, to bridge a gap, to fulfill a need. But nonprofits have mission, and that mission is what is a goal. And technically speaking, we're supposed to work ourselves out of a job.
Absolutely. But that's not the way it's going.
It's not. It's
I agree with you 100%. And I've been on a lot of not-for-profits that you know. And you're right. The system, you're supposed to be able to develop systems that will say, eventually, we want to work ourselves out of business. We don't want to be here. And that's the utopia of what we do, but it doesn't seem to be working that way. And I think the public is getting the idea that it's never going to work that way. And there's a lot of money going towards it. So forgive me, but there's people out there that are very skeptic about what's happening with these not-for-profits. There's also another sectors of not-for-profits. These guys find them as shelters for doing whatever they may do. And in Rockland, it's widespread. What happens is it makes your job more difficult to raise funds to do what you're doing on an everyday basis, and really doing the work that you're supposed to do. It makes it very difficult for people to say, because there's so many of them, and half of them are actually money making businesses, and It makes it difficult. And now with the public, with all these fraud systems going around in both Minnesota and California, just to name two of the biggest ones, billions of dollars, it's tough for the public to wrap their head around. Am I really providing my taxes for this situation or not? Let's just move to another thing that I think you have done better than probably any nonprofit that I've worked for, and that's the ability to start to think about a nonprofit as a business, which is very difficult for nonprofits to do, by the way. I'm a businessman, and for 40 years, and I think one way. I got to make a profit. It's or I'm not going to be here. So we work every day for efficiencies and to make a profit. That wasn't really the attitude of not-for-profits. It's like, okay, if we break even, we're good. So our efficiencies don't have to be looked at all the time. But in your case, I think you've done something radically different, where you started to bring for-profit ventures into a non-profit organization. Go into that and explain how you did that and why you did it.
So this is the paradox where we have a lot of nonprofits, and it's true. And there needs to be something that happens there. But at the end of the day, the nonprofits, they do employ a lot of people, and they're a big employer in the country, in the world. And at the end of the day, that I agree 100% that nonprofits need to be led like businesses. I think too many of us are focused on just trying to get enough of the cash to cover the expenses and not thinking about the future. If we employ this many people, why couldn't we make it a place where people make a career out of it and give them a better life as an employee, while also making this business run in such a fruitful way? And so there is purpose in the sense that nonprofits can fill a need and provide supports in the community, and every day give tools to people, right? Teaching them how to fish, not
Right.
giving them the fish, but teaching them to fish, sending them out in the community, and having new people come and say, this is what I need. You know, you did this for them. I need the same thing. I need the same supports. I need help. You know, and while at the same time looking at an opportunity for self-sufficiency. Nonprofits, like you said it earlier perfectly, it's so hard in Rockland County to raise funds because everybody's going after the same people who donate funds. And to me, it's just, it gets to a point where it's got to be tiring to that donor to say, here's another nonprofit, would you help us? Even if the mission is great. And so you got to figure out as a nonprofit, what can I do to change how we become self-sufficient and rely less on donations and fundraisers and rely more on a business model that creates self-sufficiency for the future.
And I think that you've done that in a lot of different things. What I see is this with not-for-profits. There's no place, there's no goal at the end, okay? We talk about, yes, let's work ourselves out of business, and that's the goal. That's not realistic, and it's never been. It's really now with not-for-profits, like, how do we survive?
Yeah.
How do we get our share of the pie from New York State through the federal government to make our next budget?
Yeah.
That's what the real conversation is.
Yeah.
But you know, what are the goals? What are the standards we're trying to get to? What are we really trying to do? Instead of just helping people, is there a place where you say, okay, we've accomplished that goal, and that's really what our mission was, okay?
Yeah.
Not to just keep giving and giving and giving to more and more people that are coming through the system, but how do we get them out of depending on us and getting back to, you know, contributing back to society? I don't think that's looked at enough. I think it's really, for not-for-profits, especially, and like I said, I'm very familiar with them, it's like, okay, we have a mission, dude, we're going to take care of these people.
Yeah.
But part of that should be, taking care of the people should be, okay, if we take care of them, what is the next step, especially in the recovery field? You know, is there programs that set up to say, okay, you're sober, you've been sober for a while, you've been living independent, you've proven to us that you're not going to relapse. Here's some training. Here's some occupational training. Here, what do you want to do? Where's your skill set? Let's push you that way. Let's get you back and put distance between where you were and where you're going, okay? I don't see that. And it's very frustrating to me because I run a program, as you know, helping guys in recovery, and the first thing I do is let's make a plan. Okay, without it, we're going nowhere. You're gonna end up in the same place 6 months from now or a year from now, or whatever it is. So that's where I see the nonprofits breaking down. And it takes, you know, a lot of dedication for nonprofits to do that, to follow that person and say, okay, this is the goal for you, all right? And it should be very similar for all of them, to be independent, living, contributing back to society, not to be stuck. Too many not-for-profits, in my mind, have people that are systematically in that system for life.
Yeah, codependent. That's exactly right. You create a codependency, so now they have to come to you. And for me,
but you're not teaching them how to get out of that.
Exactly, and that's why I love working at Bridges. And by the way, we're a network of many centers across the state. But what we've developed is programs like just last year we had a $100,000 grant from M&T Bank that allowed us to send people to specific certification programs, like you were talking about, building skills. We got CDL license for people. We got training for electricians, plumbing, and we got people jobs in those high demand fields.
Those are long-term solutions.
That's right.
Not short-term solutions.
That's right.
And those are the programs that now, if you had said to me, my tax dollars are going towards that, I know there's a goal here. There's an end there. You know what I mean? But if you say to me, my tax dollars are going to a not-for-profit, and we're going to do the same thing we've been doing for the last 10 years, just dealing with different people, because other people have already died, and we're just pushing people through. And that's what the feeling I get. Maybe it's my own personal feeling, but I don't think so. I think the general public's starting to get to that point, and it's going to be very difficult in the future if you don't do things like you're doing, running things like a business. I mean, let's talk about one of your which I thought was an ingenious idea. And again, I had my doubts about it in the beginning. I have to be honest, when you started talking, because I didn't understand the whole concept. But as I learned more and more, the universal house or the universal living arrangements that's coming from you. Why don't you talk a little about that house in New City, actually?
Yep. So a lot of the projects we do, just for context, we do it because no one else wants to do it.
Right.
Or they're doing it, but they are taking the wrong approach because they're not inviting the minds that can help them do it right. And so what happens in those situations, we end up taking the lead. A good example is as a sensory room we put in the mall. We did that because the mall said if we did it, we have to put security guards in there. And I'm going, that's not the purpose of a sensory room. So we took the lead. We got grant money. We built it and we put it in there. And
why don't you explain what a sensory room is? Because I don't think people understand. I happen to, because like I said, I'm on the advisory board and I've been into it and it's an amazing place. But again, I had no idea what this was, and I had my doubts. I'm like, but as I grew to know it and learn about it, it's a fantastic idea, and it's really thinking outside the box. So explain to people what a sensory room is.
Definitely. So we live in a world where you have intellectual, developmental disabilities, folks with sensory capacities, right? You go to the mall, it's overwhelming. There's a lot of lights, noise, and sounds.
It's overwhelming for me.
Oh, absolutely. And if you have
I don't go that often, to tell you the truth.
Absolutely. And I from the beginning, I felt the same way. That's why I introduced the idea. And when you're a parent with a child with autism or a child with anxiety, right, and other mental health issues in that sense, being in a mall can be chaotic. And so why not, in a perfectly suited location, put a sensory room? It's meant to help you decompress. Lights are dim. You got lighted tools and aspects like we have a little area where you can just sit down in an egg chair. It isolates you from the sound. It really helps you decompress. You can even take a short nap if you want to. There's a area where you can kind of just focus on the lighting and patterns and pull things out of the wall, put it back on. It's called a Light Bright, actually, if you remember Light Bright as a kid. And then there's a hammock. You can go in the hammock and kind of ball yourself up and just relax. People have laid down on the floor and just relax on the floor, with the smell of lavender and the nice calm sounds. The sensory room is meant to do that, to give you a peaceful, quiet environment away from the noise, to help you decompress. A good example for someone to understand this is if you are an introverted person and you go to a party where you have to force yourself to be extrovert, by the time you get home, you do what? You crash. Right? In a mall, and with all the chaos that's happening, imagine that 10 times higher for a person with a sensory issue. And you feel that anxiety, and all of a sudden the sensory room is available to you. You go in, and now you just decompress. That's what it's supposed to do. And I've seen that happen many times with the folks that have gone in there, and it's a beautiful experience, and they are so grateful. They write us these reviews and letters, and they tell us how fortunate and how really grateful they are to have a space like that in the mall. And it does cost to get in because we need to sustain it. So, and it's a nominal cost, and it's for 30 minutes, but it gives you time to decompress and regulate yourself so that you don't get to a point where you become manic or episodic and start to kind of scream out like we've seen in the past.
There's a lot of layers to this, okay? And I don't want to, we probably don't have time to go into all of them, but this would never even be a thought when we grew up. Okay, this was not even in the radar or the realm of things. So I think there's two things happening. One is that autism, just because you mentioned it, is up 100-fold. I mean, it used to be
30.
One every 30. It used to be 1 in every 30,000.
Yeah.
And that's what we were exposed to. If somebody had autism, a little different, no big deal. But because that comes from probably a lot of different things, a lot of them to do with the environment. And they're just doing research on that, but they are finding that this could be a major problem of the environmental nature that what you're exposed to. So there is a need for that. There wasn't a need for it 30 years ago.
Yeah,
okay, because you just didn't have that many. Kids screaming in the mall. That was like regular stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He just didn't want it. He wanted something in the last store and you didn't get it, and he's gonna rip it. He's gonna rip it till he gets home. And hopefully you'll go back there. But there is a need for that.
Yeah.
Why that need is so much more now than it has been in the past, that's a whole nother conversation we could have for a couple hours.
Well, look at anxiety. The rates of anxiety are so much.
I think that's an environmental thing from, the internet, the phones, this, that,
Technology,
and people aren't addressing those things, so we're finding ourselves in very bad situations because we're putting the cart before the horse here.
Yeah.
And like I said, I could be here for a couple hours talking to you about that. I've done a lot of research on it. But let's talk about the next project again.
Yes.
Again, I had my doubts because I didn't understand it. But as I grew to understand it, it really made a lot of sense, and even more than what I was originally thinking about, because I put some thought into it afterwards. Yeah. So talk to us about a design home for the disabled.
Yeah, so we another area where we took the lead because no one else is going to do it, and if we rely on anybody else, they're not going to do it the way it needs to be done. But what we're talking about here is sustainable living, long-term aging in place, right? And we're coining it where you actually suggested, Brian. It was one of the best things that came out of one of our meetings, is calling it the forever home, the true forever home, right? Everybody talks about, I want to buy my forever home. But the reality is, if you become disabled, your forever home is no longer available.
Suitable.
To you. Exactly. You have to move out, you have to build an extension, you have to spend money to get this house.
But the original idea when we first talked about it was really geared towards your clientele.
Yes.
How do we produce a house that people could live not in an institutional manner anyway, or need extreme help to live in every day, but actually live in a home and be self-sufficient, which is the goal, by the way, of what you do. And I'm really proud that you look at it that way.
Yeah.
So that was the original. Nexus of the idea. But now,
and it's a universally designed home.
Right.
So it's meant think about a parent with a stroller going into their home with ease, the same way a person with a wheelchair would.
Right.
Think about a grandparent coming to visit your home with a walker, just as much as someone with cerebral palsy can walk right into the door, right? It's the value of giving someone a home that they can live in with dignity, that doesn't have the tight hallways, that doesn't have the tight doors, that has the bathrooms that are fitted in the correct manner so that anyone can use it. And you can live in it for as long as you need to, and it doesn't look like a nursing home or hospital.
Right, and the thing is that talk about some of the things that you put in the walls and you do that aren't noticed when you walk in the house, but come into use as you live in the house or as your needs change.
Definitely. I mean, there's things, and this is a great saying that people say they don't build it like they used to, right?
Right.
Back in the day, the walls were made, and you could punch it, and you won't make a hole in it. Now you'll make a hole through the sheetrock and the other sheetrock behind it.
Right.
It's just so cheaply made. But anyhow, there are things that bring value to a home that helps anybody, right? Someone said if you build for people with disabilities first, everybody benefits. A clear example of that is a ramp. You build a ramp where steps would normally have been built, everybody can access that.
Absolutely.
Right? Same thing with a home. You have blocking, right? Very simple concept. Put blocking behind the wall where you would put a towel holder.
You don't necessarily have to put it in there, but it's there when you need it.
Exactly. And the idea is that it makes it sturdy, and so that you don't have to worry over time things falling apart. Same thing with positioning these blocking for grab bars. If someone needs to use a grab bar to get into the shower.
They have to have blocking there, so the grab bar will come right out of the wall.
Exactly. And people don't think about those details that are important to long-term living. So we bought this house in New City, And we worked with an architect from the Buffalo Center, the Inclusive Design and Environmental Access Center in Buffalo University.
I heard they're very helpful and very free with their time.
Absolutely. Universal design architects, incredible knowledge. They helped us take this home that was about 1,300 square feet. And again, we weren't trying to make this a mansion because we should be able to do this with any home, no matter how large or how small. And we upped the size a little bit to 2,000 square feet, and we created a layout that allows us to create a universal design space. Everything from doors that are 34 inches with offset hinges. And if you don't know what offset hinge is, it basically is not your standard hinge. It folds so that when the door opens, it clears the opening.
So it doesn't, so you have
that extra 2 inch.
Exit room to get through, yeah.
And that benefits everybody, not just a wheelchair user.
No.
Think about furniture you got to bring in.
To be honest with you, that's what after looking at it, that's where I went with this. I said to myself, it says great, not to be in an institution or somewhere they could be living in these homes. And then I thought, well, we're lucky enough, we'll all be in this situation and we can live it and we could stay home where we actually live without, putting extra burden on nursing homes and different things where you could actually stay in your home. If you could keep your parent in their home, if it was designed correctly, you would do that. Nobody wants to put a parent in a place where, but for safety reasons, sometimes you have to do that. So that's where I came up with Forever Homes because I thought about myself. I said, when I get old, I said, I'm going to need that grab bar. Hopefully I'll live that long where I'll actually need the grab bar. You know what I mean? In my case, I'll probably never make it that far. But, the idea is if you're lucky enough to live that long, these are the things you're going to, the counters, the different size, where the counters are and where, all the different things you have in that house, not only for disability, but for older people that, that could actually live in their house.
How often do you go to your kitchen and open up the bottom cabinet door to reach into that bottom shelf?
Never.
Yeah. So universal design says that
somebody else is getting that.
That should be a drawer.
Right.
So you can reach anything that's down there. That benefits everybody, right?
That's what sold me, by the way. That's when you went to the next level on. Not only is this house, because what was happening is you were pigeonholing this and you were saying, okay, and you were getting pushback. You were getting pushback from the neighborhood. And, I just happen to know some, and you're saying to yourself, okay, why am I getting all this pushback? I'm not doing anything. But when you changed the overall view of that house to take in the general public, houses should be done this way.
Absolutely.
If you plan to live there the rest of your life, or if an older person plans to live there, you can do these things that you don't even see, but will come in handy later on. You know what I mean? And that's the way without very minimal cost.
And that's why we're working with our assemblyman and senator on creating legislation that will incentivize builders. Give them an incentive to build homes.
Absolutely.
Even if they're multi-level, at the very least, the first level should be universal design. Follow those metrics, those design ideas. You can create it any way you want, but as long as you have this diameter, this length, this width, this opening, flush level, entry and exit, that's what we want to see, because then you build more inventory for people, not just with disabilities, but for families and friends. I always ask when I go to make presentations to people, I say, if you had a party in your house, can you invite people? And if one of those friends is a wheelchair user, can they come?
Right. Not only that, just look at the magnitude of money the state and federal government would save if people were able to stay in their homes.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
I know it's a nice thing to do, but even the practical point of this, of doing it for the small upfront cost, will allow people to stay in their homes longer. And, as long as they have that stuff put in when the house is built. So I think the incentive for the contractors is a great idea.
Absolutely.
Yes, it does cost a little more, but I think the savings on the back end of it is, and I think it's a selling point. If I'm moving into a house at 50, 60 years old, and I want to, this is my forever home.
Yes.
I want to make sure that I could live there, when I'm 70, 80 years old, So
and
I thought it was a very aggressive. I thought it was a great idea.
It was very
It was
aggressive.
thinking out of the box, and it took me a while to warm up to it, but I'm there.
You think you're going to be a sponsor? Yes, thank you, Brian.
But I'm there because I see not only for people with disabilities, I see it because everybody eventually will have
Absolutely.
a disability.
Absolutely.
If you're lucky enough to live that long, you know what I mean? If you don't fall over dead from a heart attack and say, "Oh, I didn't get there," well, that's another story. But I mean, But if you're old enough, and the least amount of other people's attention you need during that is better for everybody.
Definitely,
better for families, better for society.
Yeah.
Both financially and every other way. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I hope it catches on. I think you have something that you could push as long as you push it with the idea of, hey, listen, this is not just for this is for common sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Instead of people having to move out of their house because they can no longer live in it because they can't access certain things.
Yeah.
We can do things differently.
Definitely. Going back to that quote that I said, when you design for people with disability first, everybody benefits. There's 3 major examples of why that's so true. Outside of the ramp idea, right? It's fidget spinners. The stupid little toy we use that we play with was designed for young children with autism and other sensory disabilities because it helped them distract themselves while they were listening to their teacher.
Okay.
That's what the fidget spinner was for. So you fidget. And it became a craze. Everybody buys it. I have a bunch of them on my desk.
Right.
Everybody bought fidget spinners, right? That's one. Text messaging was designed for the deaf and hard of hearing. It became everybody's thing now, right? Everybody text messages. And there's one more thing that no one believes me when I say, and they look it up and they find it, they go, oh, wow. A certain person designed cruise control. And nobody believes me when I say that a person who was blind engineered cruise control for cars.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And the reason why is because, when you are a person with blindness, you have other senses that are heightened as a result. And they're in the car, and this person was in the car, an engineer, with the driver, and they were on a highway, and apparently his constant motion of going back and forth and braking and going and braking got him so sick. And he said, I got to design something that helps
that's
calm
great.
the roll, right?
Yeah, and it does. You know what I mean?
He created cruise control. A blind engineer created cruise control.
Well, pretty soon we won't need anybody steering the wheel. They'll be doing,
I know, that's true.
Be doing themselves. But that's what a person like you, who's innovative, can do. You're looking at things outside the box instead of looking at what was done. You're looking at things that can be done in the future, and that's why people really respect what you do in this county. And you've taken this whole not-for-profit Bridges to another level that people never even expected to.
Thanks, Brian.
Keep doing what you're doing. I'll be there to help you. I'll be always,
I appreciate it.
I'm always ears to hear what you have to say. I'll always throw out ideas. But, I really appreciate what Bridges does, and I'm sure everybody in the county does. And you serve people, most people don't even know who you serve. They're either forgotten or unseen, but you're there for them, and the service is for them. So I just want to thank you for doing it. I want to thank you for doing the podcast. Is there somewhere we can find Bridges, or go to a certain website
please.
Or whatever?
Yes, bridgesrc.org.
Okay.
People can visit us there. They can see
And they
all the
can
different
donate there and
programs.
stuff?
Donate there. Information on the sensory room is there. Some of the other businesses we run.
And all the services that you have are right on there.
Absolutely.
So if somebody's in need of a certain service, they can see if you provide it.
That's right.
Is there any other social media that you have?
Oh, yeah. We're on Facebook, all the social media platforms. So
Okay, you're on all the social media platforms. We're going to put links to this podcast so they can go and find out, more about Bridges and what you do and all the different services you provide in the county. And I'm happy to call you my friend, and I really appreciate what you're doing with Bridges. And thank you for doing the podcast.
And I'll say one more thing, because I can't do things in silo, because you gave me a lot of credit, but it's the reason why we can accomplish the things we do. You said it yourself, and you're one of the members of the team that I value in our Business Advisory Council. And without that group, there's a lot of ideas that we go through that would never come to fruition. But because of this group and this team, just like I have my board of directors, we have you guys, I can't do this alone, you know. And so I appreciate having you guys, and
You're the leader. You're the general, though. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. I really do.
Thank you.